Beastcall, a Paladins of the Harvest novella, written by Caden Love, read by the author. Dedication. For my parents, to Mom, who comforted and guided me to overcome every obstacle and worry, to Dad, the best coach and teacher who taught me how to live. I am not proud of my past. I've killed nuisances to cities and villages. That much I accept. But I've also killed some beautiful beasts. I've slain those worthy of a tranquil dream, the kind our gods created as living artwork. Runeth looked up from his reverie. An elder buck as large as a tavern crossed a damp field, its antlers brushed leaves, caressing them. I'm grateful for change, yet I still loathe the barbarian I once was. Now I tame beasts, having sworn off senseless slaughter. I'm a beastling, one given the gift of speaking with all living beings. I'm a part of nature, no longer its bane. Despite the pain, I find value in reflecting upon who I was before my graft, before I learned the Beastcall. Chapter 1. Bloody Gills. 4 years ago. Year 328 in the clerical era. I live to slay, by Laith I was born to kill, Runeth shouted as he pummeled his greatsword through the skull of a fleeing Zane. The other rogue Zanes began to retreat. Their webbed feet sped across the march much quicker than Runeth in his ankle-high hunting boots. He'd never taken a liking to their species. A humanoid fish was something from a dream after too many drinks. You've stolen, hurt. He wiped their dark blood from his hands across his short beard, turning to his young shield-bearer. What did they do again? Ate the elderly, sir. You should know that, replied Cale, scratching his dark curly hair. Runeth arched his thick eyebrows. Really? Cale nodded. You know, I'm not paid to ask questions, but I feel like I have the duty to punish these wet colfs. He turned his head back toward them, Cale falling behind their sprint after 2 remaining Zanes. You've eaten enough, people. It's time to pay. Purd, I sound like a sappy hero in a bard's tale. The fishmen fled across the mud, some tripping as they turned to hear Runeth's call, though they did not understand human speak. Their school of Zanes split as they approached a large green pond. Their squeals grew louder as Runeth closed the distance between his blade and the rightmost group. He raised his sword against the slowest among them, but missed his strike as they dove into the pond, becoming lost in the moss and black lilies. He turned to run around the pond to catch the other half of the group. He was too slow as they joined the others below the water. Cale panted, his map twisting in the wind as he ran to stand beside Runeth. Cale fell to a crouch, wiping the fog off his spectacles as Runeth stared at the water. Cale spat phlegm after a coughing fit, the trail lingering from his mouth and falling to his shoes. At least we got some of them. Doesn't matter, Runeth said. They'll go right back to eating. As long as they cause problems, we won't be paid a single coin. I know, but maybe you could. With the roar of a waterfall, a giant humanoid of scales and fins stood from the pond. The splash covered Runeth and Cale in the pond's black and green grime. Cale ran to hide among the trees, leaving his map in the mud. Runeth unsheathed 2 short swords from his scabbards, laughing like a madman. The creature stood in the pond with water up to his knees. Despite its form with 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, and a tail, it was no single being. It was a conglomeration of interlocked Zanes, rising higher than a chapel. Some tails led to mouths, some arms twisted with legs as if they had no bones to restrict their movement. The distorted faces of the Zanes were smashed, yet each eye watched Runeth. Runeth, I really think we should— Cale! Grab the salt! Heavy legs made of at least 10 Zanes trod from the center of the pond. Cale tore through the bag with shaking hands. How much? I don't know if— All of it! He tossed Runeth 2 jars filled with a viscous pink fluid. Runeth caught the first, dropping the second at his left foot, while he held his sword with his armpit. The second jar fell halfway into a mud pocket. He struck the first jar with one of the swords and raised it, letting the pink liquid ooze down the blade. He then shattered the second jar in the mud and dipped his other blade into the jar's remains, coating it in a blend of pink liquid and brown mud. Die, you wet colf! Runeth roared as he approached the pond. Do we have to use profanity, sir? Kale peeked behind draping vines. If anything deserves to be called a Kulf, it's this mess of flesh. The beast hissed from each mouth in its mountain of fins and gills. It stepped from the water, sinking to its ankles in mud while Runeth only dirtied the brim of his boots. He roared as he ran at the beast with his hair flowing back. The chain of creatures that functioned as hands swung at him with the speed of a darting lobster. Runeth lifted his sword, striking the arms with his pink-coated blade. Everything depended on the pink salt substance to break the wetland beast apart. Though he cut deep, he was thrown onto the far bank of the water as if the creature tossed a pebble. "Runeth!" Kale called as his superior lay still in the mud. "Runeth!" The Zane conglomeration turned away from Runeth and towards his alcove of vines. "Mother of a bloody wet Kulf!" Kale screamed. Runeth pushed himself up from the mud. "I can't hear you!" Kale ran through the trees around the pond circumference, hoping his pursuer would stumble. Trees fell like trampled twigs in its wake. The creature dominated its surroundings as a king in a murky realm. "Pull out a parting bolt!" Mud flew from Runeth's beard as he shouted. Kale flung his arms behind his back, reaching for his crossbow, and loaded a bolt with the tip the size of a spear from his hip-side quiver. Shaking hands aimed as the beast drew closer to Kale. Puddles splashed like tidal waves. "Shoot it, you Kulf!" Runeth shouted. Kale pulled the trigger and launched the head-heavy bolt in an arc into the center of the beast's chest. The bolt's tip shattered as it buried itself in the center of the beast's breast. The pink salt toxin encasing the tip would stream through the Zane's interconnected veins. A crash and sizzle emanated from the wound, like a pot of water shattering onto orange glowing steel. The behemoth contorted and wailed as the wound left a black mark on its flesh. The giant separated, falling back into individual Zanes that screeched and clawed at their bodies, convulsing. Runeth stood and limped with a hanging left arm, using his remaining strength to end their grueling screams with the blade in his right hand. Slow and thorough, he paved a path of carnage. Runeth sliced the neck of the last one, falling to his knees in the mud. "Again, Runeth!" Royce Bellick, the Thane of Agriculture for Court Zays, paced behind his desk. "How many times is Kale going to have to drag you back here? I can't have the captain of my guard gambling his life on beast hunts. We brought the salt jars. I even put salt on my blades. You know how those freshwater bastards shrivel up with salt." Runeth rebuked as he acted out the slashes of his swords from the seat across Royce's desk. Runeth remained seated, still fatigued from the previous day's hunt. "That doesn't matter. I cannot have you taking contracts to hunt down the menaces of insignificant villages. We live in Kajek, the capital of Court Zays. Those problems are for the farmers and the villagers' protection. You're the purring Thane of Agriculture, leading the court's agricultural stability. Shouldn't that be important to you?" "That is beside the point." Runeth smirked, knowing that he had frustrated his friend. Even though Royce, or Thane Bellick as he was called, was higher in Zay's nobility, they were still friends. Unfortunately, the chair across from Royce's desk had grown quite accustomed to Runeth as of late. "Don't we pay you enough to not worry about risking your life as a beast hunter?" Royce scowled, pausing his pacing. "Yes, payment is no concern." "Then what is it?" "I enjoy slaying the ugly beasts. The thrill of it is better than any meat or drink I've ever had." "By Lay's holy name." Royce returned to shaking his head, resigning to sitting at his desk. "This is the 5th time you've nearly died, and at least the 4th broken bone. It'll be the 6th scar from hunts, too." 6th scar not covered by clothing. Royce's chuckle escaped, but for only a moment. "I need you here, protecting the canton. Harvesting has begun throughout the 6 courts. You know that, right? That thing with the younglings taking the guts for magic? Runeth, this is going to change Facet and its courts more than any event in history. This is not simply a thing with magic. Do you understand what harvesting is?" He shrugged. Royce assaulted him with a pensive glare. Runeth shook his head. "The cantons of Haleness throughout Facet have found a way to remove the endowed intestine. Yes, the one that grants a supernatural ability. We can remove this from a newborn and implant it in an adult, therefore granting them the ability." "But won't that kill the infant?" "Yes, but sacrifices must be made. Most of the elect-born die before their first name day, or so I have been told. To ignore this opportunity would be a disgrace. Why does this concern me?" 2 of the 6 courts oppose this process. Courts Chus and Choice refuse the proposed law of requiring this organ harvest. I am concerned about their vehement opposition and problems it could create. So, war? No. We are not savages. Still, that does not discount the occasional violent activist. Political contentions are growing. I would appreciate the maturity of the captain of my guard to focus on protecting his thane and the kraal we serve. Runa sighed and nodded. What is it with you? Royce squinted and jabbed him an accusatory finger. You're a parting Zaysman. We should strive for righteousness rather than brutality. Well, I've never killed another human. I would argue that some of those creatures are smarter than you. Runeth feigned a chuckle. Why not slay a man if he deserves it? Would he enjoy it as much as slaying a beast? What glory would war bring him? Fair point. I suppose those magi are the only ones who could tell us. Magi? You were just talking about them, Royce. Those people who take an organ graft. The endowed? So that's what we're calling them? Yes, and they're not magi. I still don't know what you're talking about. Runeth fanned out his hands to defend himself. And you say I'm the ignorant one? I've heard about those endowed. Some of them are big and strong, some can read minds, some can talk to animals. Surely they could tell us how I'm smarter than the Zanes or imps I've slain. They can't exactly read minds, but I suppose you're not too far off. Those are common strains, but I've heard of other types. Runeth placed his hands on the chair's arms and leaned forward. Anything else? I should probably head home for some rest. Just stay away from the beasts, please. You know, I wouldn't have to kill them if I could talk to them. Maybe in a few years I could become one of the endowed. Runeth chuckled as he stood to leave. Maybe, Royce muttered. Thank you for listening to the first chapter of Beastcall. This is the prequel novella to Elegy of a Fragmented Vineyard, both of which are available on Amazon. If you'd like to continue reading Beastcall, you can check out the free ebook on my website, cadenrlove.com, by subscribing to my newsletter. If you enjoyed this, please like it and share it with your friends.